Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pensive Politics. I am your host, Christian Watson, and I am here with Michael Moreno. Michael, why don't you introduce yourself for a moment and tell the listeners your story and everything, very short elevator pitch, so to speak, and we'll get into it.
Sure. Yeah. So I kind of got my name on the internet 2019 January when I uploaded a video of me in a high school debate round my senior year, getting disqualified for quoting, quote, white supremacists such as Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro. This was in response to our Latina opponents basically telling us that they were justified in using an abusive strategy in the format of debate against us because we're white and white people have power, so it doesn't really matter. So, of course, we quoted Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro because you have to quote people. That's like a format in debate. It's really expected. And so they make those arguments very well. So we quoted them. Then the judge stopped the round, said that we were causing psychological violence, the whole stick. And then we uploaded it to YouTube. It got picked up by the Daily Wire. I think the video is sitting at about 800,000 views right now. So, that put my name on the map. And then I kind of had a second controversy about 5 months ago, about October, end of October, where I joined the Weber State debate team, went to college, freshman, and it was about essentially the same thing. The professor was pushing these very anti-white, critical theory, cultural Marxist positions on the class, and clearly not in a fashion of trying to teach debate or just entertain positions, but pushing it on students and not allowing you to debate against it. So I recorded those with my phone as well and uploaded them to YouTube and had a similar outcome. And so I'm hated by many, but I'm also supported by a lot. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely, I think that anyone who takes a stand is naturally going to be hated, no matter what they're standing on, and no matter what they're standing about, really, because a lot of people, and I've noticed this, are not very comfortable when someone is assertive. Sometimes being assertive can be a positive thing. Sometimes it can be something that you need to rein in certain circumstances. But when you are assertive, number one, you already touch a tinge of discomfort within someone else's mind. Because then, if they are not naturally assertive, or they have an ego complex, which I believe some of the people you were dealing with in this controversy certainly did, they will feel threatened by you. Then when you compound that assertiveness with moral justice, with standing on a morally just position, they will just absolutely go berserk. And they have gone berserk in your case, and we'll talk about that in a moment or so. But I just want to thank you for taking a stand, and thank you for not backing down or not being quiet, because unfortunately the collegiate debate world, and I know this all too well, is not open to people who want to take a stand on things that actually matter to them. You can only take a stand on things that matter to the dominant narrative. So it's almost, in a sense, they expect you to be parasites, to leech off of a overarching standard that you may or may not purport personally, all to help the sort of hierarchy of academic, fraud in that area elevate itself, something of that sort. Would you say that's correct? Would you say that's a correct assessment of what they're trying to do when they have these sort of dominant ideologies going into this practice? Because, for example, in your case, your professor wanted you to argue that space did not exist, and that was an illusion created by white folks. So, I mean, these ideologically slanted positions in the collegiate debate seem to me to be a simple product of the desire to parrot something, not the product of desire to find the truth. What say you?
I would say that's exactly right. They don't actually care about debate as an activity at all. They are leftists first before anything else. And I don't even think they're debaters second. Many of these people, they're not even good debaters. They just win rounds by virtue signaling and calling their opponent racist. And if they get lucky, which they often do, their judge is a college student who thinks that that's sufficient reasoning. So that's essentially what, especially in the collegiate level of debate, about 70% of arguments from my observation, don't quote me on that, there's no official study, but it seems like about 70% of the arguments being made are usually critical theory or performative, or the types of sophistry where, so for example, the professor said that outer space isn't actually outer space, it's the space that your body's in, right? Because there's space all around us. And so if you put restrictions on that, you're putting restrictions on my body. If you put restrictions on my body without my consent, then you're raping me. And then I was like, well, no, that's not true. Space doesn't mean the space in your body. It has a specific meaning in this topic. It refers to outer space. And then he's like, well, now you're raping me with words. And so you can see that, like, this is what I mean when I say sophistry. It's not actual pure reasoning. It's just non sequiturs. They find words that sound kind of similar to other words, and then they kind of use those to do a gotcha and condemn you as a racist, link you into racism, as they would say. But yeah, that's exactly right. They don't care about debate. They don't care about truth. They care about learning how to virtue signal and parrot their ideologies.
Oh, precisely. So, what have you done recently? I believe you're working on a project. What have you done recently to stymie the tide of academic conformity within debate? How are you seeking to change debate from the groundswell of slanted thought, slanted ideological thought that it is right now, and something that is actually meant to be? What are you doing?
So I actively go to tournaments when people allow me to. What'll happen, a lot, it's happened a lot already, is I'll go to a tournament to volunteer as a judge. Because the thing about debate is the vast majority of the judges are not paid. They are volunteer judges. So they're usually parents. So if I'm going to a debate and I'm in high school, I ask my mom to come judge because my school has a quota of how many judges we need to bring per debaters. And so kids are doing that, and that's great. But the problem is that the parents have absolutely like no idea how to judge. And so, if you're a good debater, you might win the argument, but the, mother judge who has never watched an actual debate in her life, besides like a politician presidential debate, she's going to vote for the other side because they were a better speaker or they were dressed more professional. You just get screwed if you have judges like that. And so I try to, I understand that because that happened to me a lot in high school when I debated. And so I'll volunteer my time for free. I'll go down to tournaments because I'm a qualified judge. I understand debate at a very deep level. And so I'll go down there to judge. But I'll go down there volunteering my time. Sometimes I'll drive an hour out, from like my house. And then I'll get there and they'll tell me to go home because there's so many coaches in the debate community that think I'm like a white supremacist. Or I've even heard people say that they heard another coach accuse me of being a pedophile. Absurd stuff like that.
What?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. I have no idea where they could ever get that. The only thing I could think is maybe because just a year ago I was in high school and I did not do too bad in terms of flirting with female debaters. Like it's a pretty good thing. So maybe now that I'm like out of high school and some of those students are a year behind me and they're still in high school, maybe that's what would give them I have absolutely no idea how they could call me a pedophile though. But yeah, and so my point in saying that is that that's something I do is I go to tournaments, and when they do let me judge, and that's even hard too because most coaches won't ask me. They don't want anything to do with Michael Moreno. My high school coach, she doesn't associate herself with me. I was supposed to coach for the school, but I mean towards the end she kind of stopped liking me, and I think she's very afraid to do anything with me now. But when I do have the opportunity, I'll judge at tournaments to help out. And then the bigger thing I've been working on, this has been a couple months, more than a couple months going now. I've had the idea for a couple of years now, but I've really started working on it in the, I'd say, past four months about, is I've been working on my own debate organization, which will essentially function as an alternative to the current parent organizations that are responsible for hosting tournaments and deciding the rules and allocating funding sometimes. Right now, high school uses the NSDA, National Speech and Debate Association. Colleges, CETA, Cross-Examination Debate Association. And so the problem with both of these organizations is what I described at the beginning, is that there's no standard of judging. They let anyone judge. And essentially, a judge could disqualify you or vote you down for any reason they want. Like what happened to me is, well, he heard Ben Shapiro, and he's a liberal college student who thinks that Ben Shapiro is somehow a Jewish Nazi, and so he drops me for racism.
Yeah,
and
quite the oxymoron. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and in that situation, afterwards, I went to the tournament director, who is a debate coach for the college team of Arizona State. So like he is supposed to know his stuff. And what he told me and the other tournament director is that I should learn how to conform. and that it was my fault because I knew that that judge had biases, and so I should have played to his biases. Like, that's how most people, most coaches in the debate community, or at least half of them, think about debate. Because of that, the debate organizations have taken no stance on judging. Their position is, you just decide who wins the debate, and we're not going to tell you how you do that or what ways you can do that that are correct and what ways are incorrect. So that's the biggest thing that our organization is going to remedy, is we'll host tournaments with set rules, and we'll make sure that judges are qualified. And then the second thing is just maintaining real intellectual diversity. In the debate community, obviously, if you have any position that sounds conservative or it's just to the right of the left, it's going to be much harder for you. It's going to be an uphill battle. A lot of the positions you won't even be allowed to argue. Like, don't even think about arguing that gender is not a social construct or that Trump isn't racist. Whether or not you agree with those positions doesn't matter. The fact is, you're not allowed to argue them in the debate space. And so all positions will be allowed. But yeah,
Right.
I kind of rambled for a couple minutes there, but that's essentially what I've been working on.
No. This is really, it's really important. It's really important because a lot of folks don't really under the depth of the malevolent thought and the conformist gospel that rivets through the currents of academic debate. A lot of folks just really don't get it. A lot of folks, in fact, who are outside of the world of debate, especially collegiate debate in general, a lot of them are just like, well, debate is a good thing. Debate is something that we need, and if you are doing good in debate, you must be a very good persuader. But in all reality, as you have shown, that's just not the case, right? It's not the case.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many people, like really, debate has stopped being what it's supposed to be. I know lots of people in the debate community who are black debaters who are recruited because their professors want black debaters, or at least that's how it seems. And they never learn how to debate a day in their life. Like, they'll be in debate for years, and then when you debate them in real life, they're terrible at it. All they know how to do is yell at you and call you racist, because that's what they've been trained to do. So they're not actually ever learning how to debate. They're not learning, the interrogation of a premise, a relationship to a conclusion, like logic.
And
they don't learn that. They don't even have to learn how to give a speech. They can literally just give a rap song or a slam poem.
Precisely.
They don't learn anything related to debate.
Yeah, precisely. But the reason a lot of universities still leech off of the assumption that automatically being a debater means something positive and luminous about your mind, about your activities, is because it is a good PR move, right? It is essentially ignorance. It's profitable, right? So a university can profit, or an educational institute in general can profit by simply having the word debate emblazoned upon their insignias, emblazoned upon their public websites, because folks think, oh, that means rigor. But it's deceptive. It is deceitful. There's a sort of deceitful alchemy going on within academia that presents, because look, a lot of debate teams that I know, and I'll even say this about mine, they are like, oh yes, we welcome everyone, come in, join us. And a lot of them will even hold off on their ideological predispositions at the first one or two meetings. But as you get deeper into the organization, and as you actually start matriculating, as you actually start germinating into the organization, they will begin showing you their true colors. And at that point, a lot of folks that I've talked to have ran. They have absolutely just run. They have jetted. They're like, in fact, one person I talked to was like, the first 2 or 3 events were absolutely astounding. They were phenomenal. Then when I began getting into training, I began getting asked to, defend abortion, which is fine, since, you should be able to, you may not agree with. But when I didn't defend it as well as they wanted me to, they had an emotional reaction to that. And they began to ask me, well, do you want to control women's bodies? What's wrong with you? Why aren't you going all out with this? They began to scold you. That's not the spirit of true pedagogy. That is literally a spirit of academic, of intellectual slavery that is trying to take hold over that person. Because if you're actually trying to teach them to be good with pedagogy, you would just say, okay, dude, your argument, the mechanics of your syllogism had A, B, C, those premises or whatever, your conclusion, we're missing this. It wouldn't be, oh, you must hate women. Oh, you must hate them. No. So when you actually have this sort of emotionalism existing within debate, you quickly see exactly its true nature. And in my opinion, getting to the true nature of things is one of the fundamental questions of philosophy. It's one of the fundamental questions of even academic discovery. One of the fundamental questions of every single field that does with the creation of things, right? So even like with this coronavirus, they're trying to get to the true nature of the coronavirus so they can actually attack it, right? If you don't have the fact that we don't know the true nature of the coronavirus actually insulates our ability to actually affect it, which is why folks are going mad and everything. So, but anyway, the true nature of debate is what folks are starting to see when they actually get into these teams and start to get in the process. Here's my question for you: when did you begin to know the true nature of debate? Like, I'm asking you to go back a few years, I guess. To, imagine like little Michael, right? little Mike. When did like little Mike, like a few years ago, when you were first starting off, really begin to know, okay, this is the true nature of debate?
Yeah. I joined in 11th grade, so I'm gonna have to go back a couple of years and try and think. It was really, really quickly. I think so like I've been a debater my whole life, but I didn't really know there was a sport a whole lot. So when I joined in 11th grade, I was kind of like, I wonder what's gonna happen. I wonder how good people are. Like this is supposed to be professional debate, and I guess I quickly realized that like there's really no reason to worry about it. Like these are just normal people doing debate. But one of the bad things about normal people is I was familiar with the type of fallacious reasoning that normal people do all the time because I debated them my whole life, and then you just see those same types of people in debate, except now they're given the tools to really argue these type of fallacious mindsets. And so I'd say like I really noticed I guess this type of like critical theory part when I started really competing and going to tournaments. I luckily I had an assistant captain who taught me about like critiques pretty early on in progressive debate. Not as much as I would have liked him to, but I definitely got a feel for it, especially because I competed in varsity pretty much right off the bat. And even when I was doing traditional Lincoln Douglas, most arguments through racism would be brought up. But when I got to policy, it's like, even in Utah, I'd say maybe like, depending on the circuit, about 30% of the time to 50% of the time, the argument's going to be like a critique, like or some critical theory, anti-white identity politics, feminist position.
I see. Wow, that's something else. And so the questions, I have a few avenues I'm going to get on with this, but I suppose let's choose one. So,
sure.
As it relates to, could you imagine an argument being made that the intellectual and academic insularity of debate may help produce people who represent and embody the nature of duality in society? What I mean by that. So if you have a entirely conservative debate space or entirely left-wing debate space, and the society overall, as America right now, America's society overall, despite popular belief, is predominantly conservative. Like most folks are conservative or center or centrist. A lot of folks are not. A lot of leftists are in the media. A lot of leftists are in academia. But most people in America are middle of the road or right leaning. That's just how it is. I mean, the middle of the country in the South, they all overwhelmingly vote for conservative politicians all the time. So, could the argument not be made that producing people that go against those narratives allow those narratives to be tried and tested in the public space and either disregarded or kept on the behest of how well they endure scrutiny? Every process, every principle requires an opposite, right? Love requires hate for us to differentiate what love is from hate, right? Hate requires, exactly. So if we didn't have hate, what would love be, right? If we didn't have sunlight, what would darkness be? If we didn't have dark light, what would sunlight be? These concepts sort of have a sort of symbiotic relationship. And so perhaps this ideological conformity is in that same spirit, in that same spirit of symbiosis that is required for concepts to mature and be investigated thoroughly and correctly. I'm not saying this is a good argument or I agree with it, but I think it is something that could be said. What would you say to that?
Well, it is important for liberals to say their ideas. I think every idea should be entertained. I'm constantly interrogating my beliefs and interrogating their beliefs. But the issue is when it's an echo chamber, specifically in academia, because academia is where the mainstream comes from. So whatever's going on in academia, whatever school of thought is prevailing, is going to trickle down into society. So, like, the vast majority of people were not academics during the Enlightenment period, but the philosophical movements that happened definitely influenced the way that people thought and worked and acted. There's still a lot of people who are pre-modern, but the point is that there's a little bit of a delay. But once that delay kicks in, it starts affecting all aspects of culture. And so with academia specifically, if there aren't people who are contesting leftism on college campuses, then they can just develop these theories with absolutely no check. They don't have to make sense. They can look at phenomenon and then extrapolate potential conclusions from those phenomena, which is fine, right? But the problem is they're only hypotheses that leftists come up with. So they'll look at the fact that there are less women in certain fields, and then make a hypothesis about society being oppressive and the patriarchy, which is a possible explanation, but it's just a hypothesis at that point. But there's no one there to call them on that. And even if they are, they're called racist until they quit academia, and then we're right back to no one calling them on that. And then,
so what you're saying is that, yeah, the principle of duality and embodied within their own field, essentially. It's singularity in their own field. So that's actually a brilliant point. Because if they cannot even have that duality in their own field, how can their presuppositions be known to be correct or to be sound argumentatively? And B, how are they themselves actually benefiting from their exchanges if there's no duality within their own field? So you're right. There's no friction in academic debate between leftism and there's no friction. The only friction that happens is within that same umbrella of leftism, or so to speak.
Yeah.
In which you are trying to see who can be more left wing. For example, when I went to a debate tournament in Illinois, there were these two teams. I won't say the schools, but there were these two teams, and they were basically arguing. One was arguing that it was basically a debate between disability rights and the other two debaters experienced it as queer people. And which, listen, I'm just living the disclaimer against anything like that. I myself, I'm not against that, but just from a purely argumentative standpoint, so much of their own experiences and so much emotionalism or emotionally charged subjects were injected into that space that it really became what issue matters more. And the judges themselves said, you know what? This is hard for me because I'm disabled and I'm queer and I'm gay or whatever. And this is so hard for me because I feel like I'm betraying part of myself or myself as a whole if I pick one of the other. But I wanted to scream the truth out to that judge in the exercise of what Emerson called the sanctity of my mind, that sort of sentiments that allow that can become the universal sense of the world that he said in Self-Reliance. I wanted to scream top of my lungs. These are not things that are A, the most salient about you, and B, the most definitive about you. These are things that if they constitute you on a micro level. The fact that you are a luminous, brilliant individual, able to reason, able to walk, able to breathe, able to observe the world, able to laugh, able to cry, able to love. Those are things that take priority over these socially created identities that you hold so dear to your heart. I wouldn't to scream that to her, but I would have been. I actually know what they would have said. You are invalidating my experience, and one folk even said I was invalidating their existence. They are literally tying what should be an academic exercise to their, existential footing in reality. What do you think of that?
Yeah, absolutely. That is exactly what they're doing. The debate space has become, in many areas, in many circuits, an oppression Olympics. If you watch even the speech events, which are not debate, it's speech events are where you just give a speech and you use persuasion and rhetoric, and you don't ever have to defend your points to anyone. It's your speech and then you're done. If you watch the nationals and you watch, I think it's like dramatic interp, you can watch the top five. You will be able to predict without fail what their speech is going to be about just by looking at them. If they're black, they're going to talk about being black. If they're fat, they're going to talk about being fat. If they're a woman and they're not fat and they're white or whatever, they're going to talk about sexism. It's and like if there's nothing that you can tell, then they're going to talk about being poor. Like it's always about oppression. You will never get to nationals arguing about some conservative point. Never, because it's well, what oppression can you gain off of that? So yeah, and it also illustrates the point before that they don't ever have to, like there is some infighting. They do have to disagree with each other from a frame of leftism. So they'll both agree on the framework of, oppression. Everyone's oppressed, right? And then they'll disagree within that frame, but they never have anyone to come and contest that frame. Like, well, wait a second, maybe that frame actually isn't true. Maybe we shouldn't be doing that. So, that's how the echo chamber works, is they have a framework and then they debate within that framework, moderate lefts to, radical lefts. And that only like radicalizes the belief into like a super left position. It doesn't actually interrogate whether or not the framework that allowed that position to grow out of was correct.
Right. That is precisely correct. So it's just, this is a collegiate debate is simply what it has become is nothing more than an exercise in phantom problems and things that have been understood by the people in that space largely, overwhelmingly. People who stay in that space, people who retain influence in that space, people who direct that space and guide that space as integral to their experience in life. And in my opinion, that is a poor existence to live. It is a poor existence
Absolutely.
to live. To believe that you are bound to this earth with a certain trait that literally shapes your future. That is, imagine for a moment if the visionaries of the world, the pioneers of the world had believed that. Imagine if Magellan had decided that since no one else before him had actually been around the globe, no one else had circumnavigated it, and it would have been arduous, it would have been a lot of, the risk of death would have probably happened. Imagine if he said, you know what, I'm not going to do it. No. He and his crew did it. They died. He died. A lot of them died. But they made it. And they literally charted a course for people to be able to hone his craft and now circumnavigate safer and more quicker. If Magellan had not done that, who is to say that we would even be able to operate in the world the same way we do today, as efficiently as we do today? Taking risks in the face of uncertainty is quite literally a big part of the human experience. But a lot of people in this sort of oppression camp don't agree with is that taking a risk isn't this valuable at all. It's not a risk that puts you where you want to be. It is a predisposition based upon control at all that puts you where you want to be, and that is simply defeatism squared or even cubed, actually.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess the trade-off for them is that they don't have to worry about the responsibility that would come from making those achievements. It's like, yeah, it kind of sucks that their life's meaningless, but at least they can virtue signal and put all of the blame onto other people. And that's a lot easier than taking responsibility and following the heroic path.
Absolutely. So I want to pivot over a little bit. I want to tie this what we're talking into the current coronavirus hysteria, because my goodness, I cannot watch the news. I cannot do anything without seeing the president making an announcement about it. The NFL just shut down suspended their seasons suspended their season for the rest of the time of its duration. 1.8 million school children are actually out of school right now due to this. Several colleges across the country have actually shut down campus. I mean, you said even your college did before we began talking.
I heard 150. That's the number I heard.
Oh, God's sakes! Wow. Yeah. A lot of folks are doing that. In fact, all of Ohio's schools, I think, are being shut down. By Saturday, Disneyland's being shut down. Everyone is just going into complete berserk mode over a virus that number one has a survivability rate of 96% globally. That's number one. Number two is not a harm, but a nuisance to a great majority of the population under 50. Number three is completely and utterly survivable to those with even the basic amenities in healthcare over 50. And number four is not even 1/10 of 1%, 1 ounce, 1 iota of what human beings in the past 100 years have overcame to be as great as we are right now. In the past 100 years, we have literally created ways to challenge distance and time and interconnect this world so that our lives could be easier, better, and more sort of like more cooperative. We have literally unlocked the nadir, unlocked the box of human cooperation, which has allowed our economy to be so globalized and has allowed our relations to be so instantaneous, which provided the conceptual foundation for the internet. And we are freaking out over something that is not even near challenges we had to go to get there. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's not really a clear answer on coronavirus right now, but I will say, if anything, from what I learned about, the YouTube videos I posted and the reactions I got, it's just how connected we are. Like exponential growth and compound growth is a force of nature. It's extremely, you can't even begin to comprehend how powerful it is. So like when I posted the videos initially, they were getting very, very small views, and then I started posting them to Reddit, Twitter, that type of stuff. It incrementally increased. And then, as it continued, the exponential curve, happened, and it got like a lot, like hundreds of thousands of views. And then that triggered the Daily Wire to write articles about it and other news outlets, which made it even more. And so, it doubles and doubles and doubles, and it gets very exponential. And that's how all things which operate via connection between people work. And so if we have a disease, it's like, yeah, okay, it hasn't infected more than the flu this year, but if the rate at which it's increasing is also doubling, like, we shouldn't be treating it like it's nothing. And even if you're right that the majority of people who get it are not going to even have severe symptoms. If you're a healthy person, from what I've heard, you might have like a cold. You might not even have any symptoms. But if we assume even a 1% mortality rate, and we assume that at least 1 million people are infected, maybe my math is wrong here, but isn't that like 10,000 people? Isn't 1% of a million like 10,000 or something like that? I don't know.
Oh, you're asking the wrong brother. You're asking the wrong brother.
It's something
I'm
like
terrible
that.
at math.
I think it's 10,000. Someone can correct me on the podcast if they want, but like 10,000 people dying isn't a joke, right? And last night I watched a podcast with Joe Rogan with the disease infection specialist. I think his name's Michael Alzheimer, something like that. And he was saying that conservative estimates are this disease is going to infect, like I think he said like 70 million people or 70 million hospitalizations from it or something like that, and would kill about 480,000 people. And that's conservative estimates. So yeah, I mean, that's not like a lot compared to the 8 billion people we have on Earth, but it's still something. Even if you're not going to be, sick and die from it, if you get sick and you're an incubator, you could get other people sick who will die from it. So while I don't think it's like end of times, I do think it probably is worth, like at this point, containment isn't really possible. It's in the United States. There's 546 cases last I checked. In Utah, there's 3. But that's only the ones that are confirmed. My guess is it's probably a couple dozen in Utah right now because, it takes a couple days for people to realize they're sick. So I'm thinking there's probably like 20 people in Utah who have it. And of course, they're going to infect more before they're checked and confirmed. And it's going to spread. Again, there's lots of estimates everywhere. I saw one of the banks was saying it's probably going to be 70% of humanity that'll be infected, which is a crazy estimate. Business Insider, they did 40% to 70%. That's their estimate. I think it was the HWO. They announced today that it's a pandemic. So there's a lot of different perspectives going on about it, and I don't think we should be crazy about it and think it's like the end of times. It's probably not going to kill you. But it is something to worry about, I think, and it is something to try and take actions towards controlling. And I think closing down schools in areas that do have confirmed cases might be a good idea. But I mean, I'm not an expert on
Mm-hmm.
the subject. I haven't
Mm-hmm.
read every news article. That's just my thoughts on it from what I know.
Right. Right. No, look, and I think that's absolutely reasonable. Listen, I would be, it would be a fool's errand for anyone to sit up here and say, anyone to sit on a position of authority or position of ignorance and say, no, this is something not to be worried about. The problem I am trying to identify is the way in which we worry about it, or the way in which, not worry, the way in which we address this. We are addressing it in a manner that resembles nothing short of mass panic. And mass panic can actually, it has their scientific effects. Actually weaken the immune system and actually make you more susceptible to contracting, like being seriously ill or hurt from this virus in the first place. I think that we should take reasoned, rational approaches, but we should do so calmly. We should do so in a way that inspires confidence and leadership, not in a way that inspires, debilitating, the debilitating sickness of worry. That's my thing.
Yeah.
I think that look, we have to address this in several ways. We have to make sure that this is contained in any way possible. I think possible, respecting other civil liberties, of course. That's always very important because during public health crises, the government tends not to respect civil liberties. We're seeing that in Italy, where everyone's literally being shut down. We're seeing it in New York, where China literally just throwing people in fucking cages, and we're seeing it in New York, where they're literally restricting the amount of people that can gather and move freely in a space. So, I mean, there are things we need to do, but we do not need to restrict people's liberties, in my opinion. But let me actually ask you this: how do you think, consistent with the libertarian principle, how do you think the government should respond to public health crises?
That's an interesting question. A little notification right there. You can cut that out in post. I'll answer now. That's an interesting question because libertarianism is founded on the NAP, non-aggression principle. So you could make the argument that if you are a walking incubator and by just someone breathing in the air that you exhale, that they will get infected, I would say that you would be passively aggressing against people, violating their right in some sense. And so I could see a libertarian argument or justification for preventing people from being able to leave their house if they're truly like that. I mean, in the same way that I could see a libertarian argument for banning smoking in public, because I don't consent to breathing that toxic mess, and you can make arguments for that. I think if I were my position, libertarian perspective would be if someone is at the point where just their existence is likely to cause other people around them to be sick, I don't think it's unreasonable for the government to prevent them from going around other people. But that's just my first thoughts about it. I haven't really thought about what to do in case of a pandemic from a libertarian perspective.
Yeah, it's been an issue that I'm currently developing. Yeah, it's been an issue I'm currently developing on right now. Personally, I think that there are a lot of things that have to be considered here. Although the harm principle typically, which is basically the foundation of the non-aggression principle, as it was stated by John Stuart Mill, it really implies quite direct aggression. I think that if we have a standard that says aggression can be passive, then a lot of things that people do that are perhaps even benign in terms of being able to harm your body or harm your existence could be construed as aggression, and that can be used as a bludgeon against them in a libertarian society. And that's actually the antithesis of a libertarian society, in my opinion. So I think there are a lot of things to consider, but I do think one of the few, so when Ron ran for president a few years ago, one of the few things he talked about, one of the few departments he wanted to keep, because he wanted to abolish so many departments, one of the few departments was the Department of Health that he wanted to keep. I do think there is a role for the government to play in soliciting experts and getting them on panels and trying to guide public health. I don't think that role exists in terms of healthcare. I'm not sure it exists in terms of, healthcare czars or whatever. No, I don't think it exists in terms of, but it exists in terms of advice and perhaps counsel, maybe. So I do think, if I was president and I was libertarian and everything, I am libertarian. If I was president, I probably would be meeting with the CDC constantly. I probably would have a CDC in the first place, and I probably would be doing everything I can, working with private partners to try to contain this thing. Now, you get the last word, man.
Right.
Yeah, you get the last word. What do you think about that?
Oh, sorry. Okay. I didn't hear what you said at the end. Yeah. So I think it should be a fine line. Um, Obviously, like we shouldn't say if you breathe around someone, they don't consent to having your air on them. But if there's like an actual infectious disease, maybe the law could be like you're not allowed to go within 20 feet of people or touch anything that other people use, which I guess would indirectly result in them probably having to be confined to their home. But yeah, again, like I don't think that agreeing to that. I don't think you would necessarily break, the NAP by conceding that. I think you could still, make a very clear distinction between which things are harms and which things are just, lack of positives or,
I agree.
just human rights.
I agree. I agree. I agree. I think there's definitely a place for the NAP in terms of the administration of public health. I do agree. I agree.
Yes.
I think that's right. All right, Michael. Do you have anything else you want to say before we close off? Anything else you want people to know?
No, thank you for having me on your podcast. I look forward to listening more. If any of the viewers want to find out more of my stuff, my YouTube channel is Michael Moreno. Instagram's Michael Moreno 2K, as well as Twitter. But that's about it.
All right. Thank you guys for listening, and stay tuned for another episode of Pensive Politics.
All right, thanks.